I'm Red, the non-binary creative life and writing coach. Today I get to share with you a book that I'm reading, and I'm going to be sharing the parts of the intro, and there's also sort of an intro to the intro. Bear with me as I do not have a teleprompter in front of me, and my memory is not perfect, so I've got my notes here, and I hope you stick with my little essay. I'll be looking at it, these chapters, this introduction through a sort of, eventually a little bit of a queer LGBTQ plus lens, and also through the lens of a writer. So this book that I'm reading is, of course, Brené Brown's Daring Greatly. So first I'm just going to read to you the quote from Theodore Roosevelt that she loves. Here's the quote. It's from his speech, Citizenship in a Republic, or The Man in the Arena. It is not the critic who counts, not the man who points out how the strong man stumbles, or where the doer of deeds could have done them better. The credit belongs to the man who is actually in the arena, whose face is marred by dust and sweat and blood, who strives valiantly, who errs, who comes short again and again, because there is no effort without error and shortcoming. But who does actually strive to do the deeds, who knows great enthusiasms, the great devotions, who spends himself in a worthy cause, who at the best knows in the end the triumph of high achievement, and who at the worst, if he fails, at least fails while daring greatly. Of course, I have feelings about the he, him, man pronoun. This is from 1910. And of course, in that time, man, even though people say that it means all people, it did mean men, because women or people who are not either man or woman still not quite seen as equal. Yummy, right? But for Brené Brown's research, she does broaden it, of course, to all people. Though there are some feelings I have about pronouns throughout this book, but we'll get to that eventually. So, in this introduction, she also says that because she's a vulnerability shame master, right? She's a researcher. She discovered that the level to which we protect ourselves from being vulnerable is a measure of our fear and disconnection. And I would like to say that that's not always true at this point. She does get to it in the book. But just from this video, I'm going to say that you do have to be sort of discerning about how vulnerable you are with folks within or without the arena, based off of your relationship and where that relationship is now and where you want to take it. And you have to be very careful about how hard you push with your vulnerability and what you're using it for. There's another quote here that says, we spend our lives waiting until we're perfect or bulletproof. And I would like to acknowledge that for a lot of minorities, and I specifically just know more about the queer experience. If you don't identify with the word queer, substitute LGBTQ, whatever you like, whatever's good for you, whatever feels good. And I'd like to say that even that illusion doesn't exist for a lot of us, except for when we're trying super hard to pass as straight or cisgender. We don't, it's not a good thing to have to lean back on, is that perfectionism. But for some people, it does support them in a certain way so that they can get to a certain place, right? Yes. We kind of have to, as queer folks, we have to walk into this arena with a pre-criticized identity. And sometimes those in the arena that you think you belong in, this arena, right? You think you're with your people. Sometimes those people turn their spears on you. And I'm not saying this is overall every space. No, not at all. It's just sometimes it happens. And that is the human experience, right? There's also, outside of that space you feel like you should belong in, there's also risk of being disowned by your family or your community, or having to be in a place where you must enforce sort of a self-cognitive dissociation in order to survive. You have to press down your authenticity in order to be welcomed, to be fed, to be able to stay warm, to survive. There's also extra risk of real physical violence that I have to acknowledge. You can see that in the patterns of what's been happening in the last 4 years. That's that. And sometimes the armor that queer folks wear, somehow something happens that the armor itself, the defense mechanism, becomes so sensitized. Like, it's as sensitive as the skin or the organs that they're trying to protect, right? Their emotions and their insides. And so sometimes these folks can sort of attack before they even have to defend. Like, if you say something within the community that you belong in, and you just don't know every individual person in this group or in this environment, and you just say something that steps on some toes, it can be kind of scary, because sometimes that brings up like old shame patterns for them from what they expect from people, that they have gotten from their family and other areas in their life. So that can be kind of scary. Existing as an authentically LGBTQ person, as an out person, is daring greatly. And at the end of the intro to the intro, Brené asks a few questions that she's going to get to throughout the text, and I'm also going to sort of turn them into how we can look at existing as a queer person. So a few questions that I have is, how can we move forward within our fear of living authentically? How can we protect ourselves from those we need protection from, and reveal ourselves to those who we deem safe? What's the price we pay for coming out or not? How do we change our interactions with ourselves and others so we can be more supportive in the community and outside world? And I have to say, I might not be able to answer all these questions even if I read this whole book, which I hope to do. But I sure can ask them, and you can ask them along with me, and look for your own answers. Yeah, that's sort of a boundary of mine, is that I don't have all the answers. I never will. But I'm very open to talking about them and hearing questions and concerns and clarifications. So please be gentle with me. Okay. And so we move into the actual introduction, right? Okay, took me a minute. And here it talks about how Brené Brown is talking with her therapist, and she talks about how vulnerability feels bad, how she feels like it makes her feel like she's like crawling out of her skin or turned inside out. And the therapist brings up an idea to Brené that because Brené is such a cerebral person, she's a researcher, she loves categorizing, and that's great. Her therapist suggests that in response to her self-proclaimed aversion to emotions, instead of just thinking about emotions, like, oh, I'm having this feeling, and ooh, wow, all these details about it, just feel it. You don't have to categorize it. Just feel it in your body. With my clients, I call this emotions witnessing. And it's just an exercise in noticing what patterns come up within our body so we can recognize what we really are feeling. So we might be able to sort of acknowledge that we're safe even if we're having these feelings, that the feelings themselves are not dangerous. I think that's really important to learn. Like if you feel like you're about to cry, right? Like that might not feel great, but you're also not, because of the crying, you're not in danger. I hope that makes sense. So, looking at my notes here, yes. Even if the pattern is like you feel a twitch in your finger when you're sad, like that's all we're looking for is that sort of that pattern. So Brené goes on to talk about her avoidance strategies over her life, such as perfectionism and the character masks that she wore as she developed. When she started moving towards social work, she learned that she couldn't put direct experiences into perfect categorical boxes. So she couldn't feel like she was ever fixing anything. She really wanted to be able to just put something in a box, label the box, and just like put it in a storage, like done, fixed, the house is clean, right? Oh, it doesn't work that way. You do the dishes, more dishes need being done, right? Dishes, social work, it's messy, right? Not to equate the two, but there's a metaphor there. So as she was working on her master's and PhD, she found her calling in research, where she kind of could put things into boxes. She was happy to be able to try to predict and also control data. As she began to study the anatomy of connection, because that was important in her social work, Brown found that, and here's a quote, humans have a tendency to define things by what they are not. And so her research was also, in addition to patterns of connection, it was intrinsically about shame. So she has this word for people that are doing pretty well in the world. And she calls them wholehearted. And these are the people who have the highest shame resiliency, who are solid in their understanding of their worth. Her other book, The Gifts of Imperfection, provides guideposts for how to be wholehearted and engage with life from a place of worthiness, courage, compassion, and connection. Brown details a few fundamental ideals that support her definition of wholeheartedness, such as every person has a true need for love and belonging for survival, believing we are worthy of love and belonging, worthiness. We have to constantly practice wholeheartedness. It's not just something you reach and you're like, I did it, passed the level, let's move on to something else. No. And being willing to be vulnerable in all facets of life. Not just parenting, not just with your best friends, not just in your family, not just in work, but all of them. And yes, work. In her research of 12 plus years, Brown can state that vulnerability is the heart of meaningful human experience. She asked herself how to be vulnerable and still seem valid in her academic career, because if you're vulnerable in academia, you can be seen as not as valid or important in your work. I don't like that. That's not great. Her big step towards finding this out for herself, how she could be both vulnerable and valid in academia, was actually her TEDx Houston talk, which is a big deal on the internet. Go look it up. Highly recommend. It's awesome. It's only like 20 minutes. Her first video was, I'll just say it, her first one was better than the second one. The second one is just kind of a story about something that happened with her husband, but it's still meaningful. But the first one is just like absolute mind-blowing, great. Yes. So this video became viral because of her vulnerability, honesty, and clarity with her data and also herself. Brown was afraid of the publicity, but grateful for all the opportunities for connection that the talk brought. She connected with corporations, where she discovered that to reignite innovation and passion in the workplace, we have to lift the patterns of shame from our engagement and allow once in a while failure. She connected with parents, where she taught that parents don't have to be perfect, just present with their children, and role models for how to repair challenges within relationship. Because it's not going to be perfect, but it's better if we can take care of each other in our difficult moments, right? And it's good to really share that with children. Brené closes the introduction with the statement that what we know matters, but who we are matters more. We have to act upon our intelligence, act upon our research, our data, our experience, rather than just sit high on our horse of what we think we know about. So to bring it back to how we can look at this through a queer or LGBT lens, much of that bad feeling Brown refers to when being vulnerable is an extra sensitive protective mechanism. Especially before coming out or in the egg stages, folks in the queer community might not have found the rest of the community yet, so they might feel incredibly exposed. They don't have support yet and don't expect to find much. And historically, it has been dangerous to come out and live authentically. Best case, everyone's in a person's immediate environment supports them with their love, and at least in the USA, still in best case scenario, about half of the country wants them fixed or gone altogether. It's a great scenario. Don't we love it? Worst case scenario, the person who comes out or tries to live authentically get excommunicated from their families, other important communities, and it's especially dangerous for teens and disabled folks, and they get targeted by others in the area. Even when we have solid support, there's a lot of risk and danger. It's vulnerable to walk down the street. It's vulnerable to go to the pool where people expect to see your body and make assumptions and invasive comments about it, which is inappropriate anywhere for people of any gender or sexuality or experience. You don't have to make comments about bodies, especially like questions about our experiences with our bodies, unless we're in like a very, very specific talk together. Like, anyway, but it's also dangerous to stay inside forever. So we just have to be extra discerning as queer folks and discerning of our discernment to make sure that in trying to protect ourselves from danger, we're not withholding our basic need for belonging and connection from ourselves, like withholding the possibility for connection and finding other people, holding that hostage from ourselves. I also want to speak about what the intro means for writers, since I care a lot about writing and the folks who engage with it. You know, writing coach, creative life and writing coach. As writers, we have no escape from emotions in general. We might escape from our own once in a while and be like, the character's feeling that. I'm not. It's just the character. It's fine. And sometimes that's totally true. Like we're writers. We make up stuff. Maybe most of the time that's true. But still engaging with emotions in general, we must write them to also engage our audience. Even if writing is only in our journal, we must connect with them so we can accurately see our own patterns, privileges, and downfalls. In poetry and writing of all kinds, barring maybe scientific papers, we have to be able to report emotions and their effects in intra, with ourselves, and inter, with other, interpersonal relationships. And every main character needs some purpose, and shame is so prevalent that it could easily be the driver of a story. Even if finding connection or running away from shame isn't the stated goal of a character, often they are driven to make connections along their journey, find people to depend on, and find people that depend on them. A character might be running away from the deeds of the past or towards achievement for fear of not being good enough. Anybody recognize that feeling? They have to be willing to take the first steps out of the Shire, make mistakes, and be vulnerable to accomplish their dreams or goals. And so do real people. So if you have any questions or gentle comments or clarifications or just things you want discussed further, feel free to put it in the comments. I'm happy to engage. And thank you for sitting with me. I remember in middle and high school, a 10-minute presentation was like death. But here I am talking for 22 minutes. It's fine. It's great. It's a personal development. Yes, thank you for coming, and I hope you enjoy, and I hope you stick around for the rest of the book.